What's up everyone, welcome back to another video with me, Hamza Shaikh. Today's video is going to be a follow-up to a previous video I did, which was the architecture drawing tutorial for beginners on Procreate. Instead, this video is going to be the intermediate level drawing tutorial. We're going to be covering something a little bit more complex, whereas in the previous video we talked about the very basic drawing tools and interfaces that Procreate has. It was a bit more of a sketch session. I think that was a really great way to introduce what Procreate is capable of, but also show you what architectural outcomes are possible given how amazingly sensitive this pencil is and this iPad is. However, today we're going to be covering something a little bit more complex. We're going to be looking at the isometric and axonometric features that Procreate offers. Essentially, it gives you this canvas snapping functionality, which is amazing for creating straight lines, isometric lines. And so what I'll be showing you today is the way I use this function, and hopefully it'll be somewhat useful for you guys. Please remember to like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, make sure you turn the notifications on because I've been posting videos every week for a very long time now, and I'll be keeping that momentum up. So let's get straight into it. Okay, so first things first, obviously open up your Procreate file. Now I'm going to go and create a new canvas and I'm going to make it a square size because I know I'm going to want to put this onto Instagram later. So the cool thing here is we basically get to create that grid which snaps onto isometric lines. And the way you do that is you go to canvas in the settings and then you scroll down to this thing called drawing guide. Basically what you want to do is you want to edit the drawing guide. So first thing is turn it on, then go to edit the drawing guide, and you've got the option to basically create a grid on your canvas that will snap your lines to it, or it doesn't have to snap your lines. I'm going to do it with the snap lines to show you this awesome feature. So then you choose which drawing guide you'd like to draw with, and you've got the 2D grid, you've got the isometric, you've got the perspective, you got the symmetry. I'm going to save the perspective for another drawing session, maybe in the advanced one. So let's just go for isometric today. And in the isometric one, you then get the option to control the thickness of these lines, the opacity of these lines, and the grid size. So there's all sorts of amazing features here. I'm just going to set my grid size to about that. Thickness, middle, and then the opacity can come down as well. And then, so the most important thing next is to just turn on this little thing in the bottom corner. So this thing which says assisted drawing basically means your lines will snap to the grid when you go back to the canvas. Click done, and now you're ready. So when you select your pen and you actually start to draw, you will see that your pen is actually snapped to the grid, which is really cool, which is what we want for isometric drawings. But the other amazing thing here is you can create another layer straight away that is not assisted. So it bypasses the settings you just created, and therefore you've got a layer where you can do sort of free drawings and do all sorts of squiggly lines. And that is really, really good for anyone who is needing to bring in, a good variation of line work. So this is really ideal for me. So the drawing I'm going to do today is, it's kind of going to be a bit improvised. I'm basically going to draw a little habitable or residential block that we can then use to create a tower. So the first thing is I'm going to create this rectangular box, and I'm not going to be very neat with it. I'm going to be quite rough because you don't need to be so precious with these things, and you can see how amazing these lines are because with no effort whatsoever I've got myself a perfectly drawn box with straight lines, and I don't even need a ruler. So this is the awesome function that Procreate has built in. And the really cool thing here is since you have a grid, you can actually work to sort of mathematical systems, split the grid in twos. You can actually see where the center lines are. So it's really, really helpful. Now, another thing I would recommend is to play with your line weights. You have a strong opportunity here to make sure you can bring in all sorts of accuracies and all sorts of cool details. Now, if I take the line weight down and also the opacity, I can create some fainter lines, some more faint lines that follow the sort of wireframe of the actual axonometric box in this case, which will give me more reference. If, for example, I want to do details here, I'll know exactly where they land behind this wall panel. So at the moment what I'm doing is I'm just creating a line so that I know where my windows are going to come up to. I'm going to then create a new layer that is not constricted to the line snapping, because what I want to create is this archway. So what I'm going to start to show as I keep building up these rough details, you can see how rough this line work is, and I think this is quite an important tip for people to remember. Know where you can actually be rough and where you have to spend time with detail. I think one of the most important things I've heard as a piece of drawing advice from someone was always remember to work on the whole composition and then start to get down with the detail. And that sounds quite obvious, but a lot of people forget this fundamental thing. You want to work on your whole composition and really get an idea of the entirety of that drawing before you then start to get lost in the detail. Because the problem is, if you start getting caught up in the detail early on in the drawing, you completely disregard what the whole drawing is meant to be, and that's how people end up, I mean, this is something I used to do, but I used to end up getting really focused. I'd spend hours and hours, doing some sort of detail, and then I ended up really not liking it. And I then realized, well, actually, I'm not looking at the whole composition, and that's where the real power of a drawing comes about. It's in the composition of the whole thing. So, just a quick reminder for everyone to make sure you are drawing rough when you are creating your composition. But this is where I'm going to be doing my vents, because I am bringing a little bit of realism into this drawing. And another quick tip to bring your buildings a bit more realism is to remember that you'll never really have edges to the building where they meet and just do something like that. That never happens. Usually there'll be a thickness to this. If there's a window there, then it will have a frame, obviously, and it will have all sorts of details that basically show that there's a thickened element on the edge, and the same applies to everything else really. So it's a really cool quick technique to just do loads of lines, but it actually then brings a level of realism to your drawings by just bordering off all the edges. It looks much more like an actual built thing. And here's another cool thing, that if you're erasing something in the assisted layer and you don't want to erase with the eraser snap to the grid, because that's what the eraser does in this mode, you can basically just tap the assisted layer, turn drawing assist off, come back in, do what you need to do, and then just basically when this is done, you can turn your drawing assist back on. I want to express the verticality of this drawing and this facade. So what I'm going to do is create another layer which will be drawing assisted, and I'm going to create these kind of external columns that bring in this level of verticality, this sort of cladding. Now I'm going to make sure that this is a closed shape, because I'm going to actually fill this shape in so that it hides the lines behind it. So if I then choose white, bring in the white color drop, we can start to create what looks like a little bit of a external column or a batten. Now the cool thing here is I can take this batten or this little component, duplicate it and apply it wherever else I want. Once we get to the point of creating a tower from this block, you're going to get a very nice vertical element, or I hope. Cool. I'm quite keen on maybe making this critter window, so let's add a little grid to it. Let's make the grid a bit more logical. So as you can see, I am doing this drawing quite rough and fast, but the more care you take with these things, the better. But obviously remembering the advice I gave you of be rough, be quick with your composition, and then when you get into the details, and actually the beauty of Procreate is it gives you these sort of tracing paper functionality as well, so you can go really rough here, and then when you go and you can create another layer and just draw on top and start to refine your lines more. And I'm just going to finally finish expressing these windows here, which I might just keep them as sort of contemporary windows. No need to do any fancy expression, I think, but let's just give them a few more borders to really express that three-dimensionality. I mean, if I'm thinking that someone is going to be, well, let's say floor to ceiling is 4 meters or something, if someone's going to be that high in comparison, that tall in comparison, it's quite a generous sized dwelling. I mean, very high ceilings, but I want to maybe create another element here, just to make it, you know, look a bit more realistic as a dwelling. And maybe I need to add a lift shaft, or I definitely need to add some sort of vertical transport to show that there's a way of getting up into these apartments. Okay, so I've had my little rough sketch. Now I can start to do that in actual isometric. Turn the drawing assist on, bring my line weights back up. Let's start with the lifting shaft, and we'll make that follow this line, and we can keep this entire area, this lobby space, as a completely glazed element. I think that would look quite nice with little expression on the transoms. And this will be a lifting shaft. So how would that be expressed externally? I don't know. I mean, it would have to be all enclosed, so I'm thinking to keep this solid and maybe we can express it with some brickwork. Let's give it some brickwork. So now we've got this element. I'm going to group all of these elements together, and we have our repeating block element. So what I'll do is duplicate it, and I'll flatten this one, and now we've got one original layer with all of its original elements. And we've also got this flattened version, which can just be used as a bit more of a repeating element that doesn't really take up too much memory. So what we can start to do is create this tower. Now this is going to end up looking really cool, I think. And so what we can do is just align it, and then take this image and start to rub out the bits we don't need. So I'll make the rubber really big. Come in here, make sure the drawing assist is off, and take away all of this. So now we've got our two elements. We've got the original one with all of its layers, but now we've got this piece, which is the repeating block. Now all I have to do to create this tower, as you can imagine, is just take this repeating block and take it all the way down to however tall I want to make this tower. Okay, so to save time, I have done all the layer copies, so when I turn them on, you can see this tower start to take shape. Now the final thing which I've done to save time as well is just prepare an extra layer, which if I isolate it, you'll see is slightly different, which would just be the roof plant. All I've done is add a parapet to the top, take away some of the window expression and replace it with some venting, and kept the brick cladding there and the timber cladding there. And so when we turn the other layers on, we've got a slightly different top floor. Just to finish off, we need to add a bit of white inside this layer so that we don't see the layers below. And just to finish it off, we're going to add a ground floor. So what I'll do is I'll use this ground floor here, and I'll just change the way the facade is expressed so we can create this as an entrance. And that is good. I'm happy with that. And hopefully that should give you guys some good idea of how you can use Procreate in a slightly more complex way. A lot of people have asked when I put these drawings out, where did you model that? How did you 3D model that? What software did you use? And as you just saw, there's no software, there's no special 3D modeling required. You just need to be able to draw, having these kind of three-dimensional sensibilities about your drawing, so that once you create your original block, you can then start to repeat that element and create like a tower or anything that is repetitive. And the cool thing about this is it makes it look like you've done a lot of work, but it's actually pretty quick. But nonetheless, it's slightly harder than the previous one. So this one was the intermediate one. The next one I will do will be an advanced one. I'll be bringing in a lot more techniques, also bringing in various different tools. We might even use perspective in that one, something which might take a little bit longer, but will give you an even more powerful outcome. And so I hope that video was useful for you guys. Make sure you go and check out my Instagram page as always to see all of my drawings that I put out quite regularly. As I always say, none of my drawings are the same. I always do different drawing styles because I'm constantly exploring experimental drawing methods. And that's it. I'll see you guys on the next video.